everyone, and welcome to Seriously Loco, the Seriously Crazy fan podcast for El Paso Locomotive FC. I'm your host, Phil Bakke. I'm joined tonight by my co-host, Mikka Burrell. Mikka, we got game one out of the way, and we are back in the swing of things because we've got a 3-game week to cover.
The fixture congestion starts right away. Never change USL Championship. Yes, game one is done and dusted. Wasn't the result we wanted, but I think there's a lot to pick out of this one for our discussion tonight. So,
yeah, an informative performance. I think we could probably say in game one answered a lot of the questions that we had going in that we talked about last episode. Up front, if you are finding us for the first time for this brand new season, then go ahead and follow us or subscribe or whatever you are able to do on your favorite podcast platform, and you'll get new episodes. We will be releasing shows about weekly, but, in the case where there's more frequent games, we'll have more frequent shows. So we will be recapping most of the games, bringing the action, and breaking it down for everybody. And we're also on Twitter and Instagram and all that good stuff, but you can catch us on the socials as well. And you'll hear from, we had a handful of listeners give their thoughts on game one, and we will include a couple of those folks in the show to talk about their comments. And obviously, if you want to get involved in that discussion, Twitter's the easiest place to do it, at Seriously Loco. But getting the admin out of the way, Mikka, I mean, like you said, it's a 1-0 loss at home to Hartford in the season and home opener. An unfortunate continuation of a poor record on opening day for Locomotive. But it was just the one goal conceded on the penalty, Romario Williams scoring, and Locomotive, despite logging a decent amount of chances of their own, unable to find an equalizer and did fall in this one. But I wanted to first just start with your general impressions of this one. Obviously, as tight a scoreline as you can get in a loss. But what did you take away from Locomotive's opening night against Hartford?
Yeah, it was really fascinating, shall we say, just to see kind of this, the way the lineup took shape. I think we're still getting used to really running with 3 at the back, right? And that's continuing into this season, obviously. I mean, I'm sure things will change depending on the opponent, but it seems like this system is one that Brian Clairhout and his coaching staff are pretty wedded to, I guess. So to see the different new pieces, in fact, 8 different new pieces make their debuts in these new positions was really interesting. I was working the game, so I was live tweeting, and it was really kind of tricky at times to say who was doing what, because I'm these are all new guys. I need to make sure I know shirt numbers and things. So yeah, I mean, it was completely novel. It's really unlike anything we've seen before. This turnover has been really quite steep. But as for the game itself, I think the first half was pretty, I would say a little bit nervy. I think the occasion can get to this Locomotive side, and when you have that kind of unfortunate streak, as you called it, of not getting 3 points on opening night, I'm sure that weighs on the conscience a little bit. So, I think there was something to that as well. But, overall, I think Hartford Athletic as an opponent, they were definitely up for it, and I think that the talents that they've brought in are really going to do them well. I think they're going to be a much better side this season, but I do think that we could have won the game, and I think we probably could have won the game a bit comfortably, actually, if we had taken our chances. So while I do want to give credit to Hartford Athletic for how they played, I don't think that they played us off the park or anything like that. But, it's a game of fine margins, and that last detail, that last bit of quality was just missing.
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned the amount of debuts being made for Locomotive, and anytime you have 8 players, appearing the first time for the club, it does feel like it's going to be a tall ask to, show that fluency or fluidity like right off the bat. In the end, it was a bit of that disjointedness that led to the concession of the goal. And that still, I think it showed a side that's still building some trust in each other and some understanding of, how the people to their left and right operate. I think, like you said, we can take a lot of heart from this match. And I think in general, sort of a similar vibe to the beginning of last year in that, it's clear that there is a plan. It's clear that there is, that there is quality in this side, and they created plenty. And it does feel like that will tell over the course of the season. Just a question of how quickly they can get up and running. But while we're at it, let's talk about the lineup, because obviously the big question mark that we had and some of what we tried to do last episode was predict exactly the shape and what Brian was going to go for in terms of who he was going to prefer. We got a little bit of a clue because of the New Mexico United friendly. And in the end, it was that back three with the wing backs. So, a 5-3-2, maybe was the look in the end, but, maybe we can start just talking through that lineup and what you thought, one, of the personnel, if there were any surprises there for you, or, what you saw from this particular shape.
Well, with hindsight being 2020, I think that when we saw Bolu Akinyode anchoring the back line, we were a little bit surprised. But the more I think about it, the more it makes sense, because I think asking Noah Dollenmeyer to marshal that back line with brand new teammates, and he's 24 years old, so not a baby by any means, but pretty young and green in terms of experience. I think now that I think about it, it made sense that Bolu was put in that back line. But otherwise, it was pretty much what we expected as far as Stauffer and Lyons out wide, Alfaro on the left being the lefty, Brennan Craig, of course, he's come here to actually play a lot of minutes, so of course he gets to start. Jamali Way in the back, who, by the way, I think had a really great game. I'm sure we'll get into it. But the back line, other than Bolu being there, I think was pretty much what we guessed. And then the other surprise, I think, is the midfield three, if you want to call it that, with Rose and Calvillo that we expected, but also Tumi Moshibane, who is a winger or an attacking midfielder by trade.
He played more games at center forward last year than anywhere else. Yeah. So
yeah. So ostensibly a forward, being asked to play like a shuttling midfield role was interesting. And I think he had mixed success with that. But then Amando, Moreno, and Justin Dhillon up front, we expected that as well. So overall, I think the lineup was strong. I think obviously we had some injury news prior to that, specifically Joaquin Rivas with a back injury, so he was not available off the bench. And then Lalito also injured, I think going through concussion protocol, and a couple others that escape me right now. But so we didn't have our full complement of players to select from. But overall, I thought a strong 11 that could give this Hartford Athletic side a game.
Yeah, I think was it Patar who was...
Patar, yeah. Also with the leg injury.
Slight knock. More of a precaution, it sounded like, with Patar, whereas Joaquin, we might wait a little bit longer to see him, unfortunately. Obviously we'll see what the timing is like, but I think the only thing that surprised me necessarily was that the midfield being a 3 versus seeing the normal pivot of 2, and then seeing potentially like Moshibane in more of a wide attacking role up next to Dhillon and Moreno. But all things considered, not a million miles different than what we expected. I think in terms of discussing the game, like, this does feel, I think certain games feel like a discussion of moments, but this game almost feels more like a discussion of sort of like themes, especially in like lessons learned, because there was really just the one defining moment in terms of the score and the penalty. And we can, I guess, maybe discuss that sort of up front in terms of like the passive. I almost want to divide the conversation into like what we were pessimistic about out of this game and what we're optimistic about. So we'll start with the bad, because obviously it feels nicer to end on the positive. But one of the things, especially early on in the game, that we seemed to struggle with was Hartford's forwards were really able to exploit the space, both wide and sort of in front of and right behind our midfielders, where they could receive the ball in front of our midfield and then play the ball into the space behind our midfield, but in front of the defense. And Romario Williams had sort of a snapshot early from like sort of the edge of the 18-yard box from that sort of area where the back line kind of dropped off to avoid him running into the box, and he fired over. There were a couple from, I believe Michigan Galena had a couple of shots from like those sorts of areas early on. And then the penalty itself kind of comes from an initial ball played into that space and then chipped over the top. And Romario Williams chases it down. Bolu initially, who was, I do want to emphasize, Bolu I thought was fantastic on the day, but not able to deal with the initial trouble. But he does win the ball in an initial challenge, which is not given as a penalty. And Tony Alfaro, trying to cover back, does foul Williams in the process. He goes to the spot and dispatches it. But it did feel like our vulnerability, if anything, was in those spaces in between. And it felt quite easy up front for Hartford to find that space.
Yeah, and I think we have to give them credit for identifying where those spaces were very early doors. I think it was very clear from the off that Lucas Stauffer's remit was to get up and get forward quite a bit, right? And he said as much after the game that is what he's being asked to do, is to provide goals and assists, and just augment the attack in that way. So when Lucas would get forward, there was obviously this big patch of grass that Tony Alfaro is supposed to cover on his own. And then as he would step up, that would leave Bolu kind of having to shuttle wide to cover more of that space. And I think that ball clipped over the top in between the two of them. Unfortunately, it led to the penalty. And I think it's interesting because the first foul, or I guess non-foul, I don't know, I haven't looked back at the angle, but it seems like Bolu maybe fouls first, but the whistle doesn't go then, so maybe he gets the ball. But then it's Tony Alfaro that the whistle finally goes. However, FOTMob says that Bolu Akinyode committed the foul leading to the penalty, so I don't know what to believe. But I think ultimately Romario Williams was taken down, and I mean, I think of it this way: if it were Justin Dhillon, I would want that called. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, I mean, it just those little details and the little spaces that they were able to find ultimately, left our defender isolated. And, I think also credit has to go to Marcus Epps, who I think was playing really well between the lines. I mean, he was constantly an option, receiving the ball, kind of behind our midfield, like you said, and then laying it off, whether that was to Galena or Deshane Beckford, who I thought was less effective than the rest of his attacking colleagues. But still, this new look Hartford are going to cause teams a lot of problems in this league, I think. I think they're a vastly different proposition from what they were last season. So, they punished us, unfortunately.
In terms of early tests, I don't know that there are, and again, we talked in the preview about how Hartford are sort of a team of names on paper, that needs to gel. But in terms of early season tests for Locomotive, I think we'll look back on this because I think this Hartford team is going to put some pastings on people. Like, they are going to absolutely blow some teams out of the water. like in some of these games. And I think we'll look back on a 1-0 like quite favorably in the future, especially given the fact that our team is still quite early in its infancy. And we'll talk more about how this Locomotive team like grew into the game. And I think they eventually were able to, Hartford was obviously playing with a lead, and I was actually kind of taken aback at times with how conservatively they played like after taking the lead. Because I think there's probably a question of like, should they have like tried to put the game away or tried to like take more advantage of being on the front foot. But that being said, so speaking about the midfield in particular, we mentioned it was a very different look than what we've seen from Brian, typically, because we've seen Eric and Liam next to each other, but we've seen that with sort of either wingers on either side or marauding fullbacks. So it's never really been another central midfielder in there. And with Tumi Moshibane, like fulfilling that role of, a second 8, ostensibly, or it seemed like maybe the most attacking 8, and then Eric was meant to be sort of the box to box, and Liam was the most defensive. But between the three of them, I think you mentioned Moshibane felt awkward. I guess would be the right word, and the balance that you'd expect where, when you say it out loud and you say like, we have, 1 8 whose job is primarily to get forward, 1 who is supposed to support either attack or defense, depending on the situation, and 1 defending, the balance feels quite nice. But that balance never really came through, I guess, like in the run of play. It never really felt like that midfield was able to assert itself on the game.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that it's actually sort of beggars belief because of each of the defense, the attack, and the midfield. Midfield is the one with the least changes on the night. We have 2 continuing players in Liam Rose and Eric Calvillo, and then Moshibane, who I think, to be honest, is being shoehorned into that role. I mean, it's only been 1 game, so maybe I'm being a little bit too pessimistic, but he's a forward. He's primarily played as a forward, and I think he looked uncomfortable. Or maybe not uncomfortable, but at least not as involved as we would like him to be.
Yeah.
And receiving the ball and trying to do something with the ball in midfield is a vastly different proposition than receiving it out wide or, in the box. Clearly anyone who's listening to that knows this. So, but yeah, it just did not really work. And I think Rose and Calvillo themselves kind of had their own challenges. Both of them get booked in this game.
Yeah.
There was some late or desperate challenges trying to win the ball and trying to gain some kind of control. But yeah, it might be that this unit just needs time together. But yeah, I don't think it necessarily functioned the way that we would have liked. And for us as Locomotive fans, we're very used to having very good and functioning and well-oiled midfields. So it was a little jarring, I think. But I don't want to sound like I'm writing them off yet, but on the night, I thought it was kind of our weak spot.
For sure. And I think, again, credit has to go to Hartford in the form of Jay Chapman and Anderson Asadu. Like, I think the fact that they played a double pivot and our 3 felt outnumbered at times is a credit to them. I think Asiedu in particular was like very good. At controlling that area of the pitch. Not to say that our midfield is to your point, not completely writing them off. We know they're quality players. But the balance, I think, will take a little bit of time to come through, and which is a bit surprising given it was sort of the area of the pitch where we had the most continuity. But
right.
The last, in terms of just on the more pessimistic side, we had one comment from Mark Ramos at Ramos 5173, said very good performance overall, but it felt like the front 2 were stuck on islands all night. Midfield was struggling a bit to control, but when they found it, it was great. Very promising start, just seemed to lack the final connecting pass. I wanted to get to that point about Amando Moreno and Justin Dhillon, it did feel like they were a bit isolated. Obviously, there were a couple of exceptions in the first half when I think it was Stauffer twice found Dhillon with like kind of these seeing eye through balls, and we'll get on to Stauffer's performance in a little bit. But overall, I mean, it's tough to argue with the fact that Dhillon, he actually probably scores a legitimate goal on the night, which again we can talk about. But Amando Moreno, 19 touches in 74 minutes. That level of isolation obviously is not the game plan, and for a forward that thrives off sort of having the ball at his feet and being able to link up, that it's just not what you would expect in the first match out for Amando Moreno in blue.
No, not necessarily like the most sparkling debut for him, and I think it's not a comment on his quality, but more just the relative lack of fluency that we just talked about in midfield. I think Amando at times was trying to drop to receive the ball, which we don't want. We didn't sign Amando Moreno to have his back to goal, right? I don't think we signed him to lay the passes off to wing backs or anything like that. I think we want him going forward. I think we want him attacking the space and being in the penalty area. So yeah, just not. He didn't get to show the things that he's good at on the night. And again, that's another area of the pitch where the continuity is not there. That's a brand new attack in Amando Moreno and Justin Dhillon. In Dhillon's case, I was really impressed with his work rate. I think he was trying very hard to press and help out teammates, but our team and him in particular that I can remember, maybe tried to take like an extra touch or an extra pass when really it wasn't on or it wasn't necessary. And I think Brian Clarehout actually talked about that after the game of, maybe we were trying to be a little bit too pretty, trying to find that third man when it's like, let's just get shots on target, let's get balls in the box. And there was one point where Justin receives the ball in the box and he's looking for the cutback, and it's like, well, you're the striker, right? So yeah. Why don't you have a go? But those things will come out in the wash, I think. But yeah, I think Mark generally has a decent point here that there was a little bit of isolation for those forwards, and I think that's just a consequence of how the whole team was structured and how the whole team played, mixed with a little bit of Hartford being very good. Like you said, SCA I think had a really great game, and Jay Chapman as well. So yeah, that'll improve, I think, with time. And those players getting to know each other. But yeah.
I will say on the point, Dhillon definitely, in terms of the physicality and what he was being asked to do in terms of, I mean, I think it improved as the match went on, but we were asking him to be like sort of the outball, to hold up play, mm-hmm. bring other people into the game. And I mean, he is fantastic in the air, as you'd expect for a guy of his size, but he's, he wins 5 of his 7 aerial duels, which is not a given against what was a good, a good center back pairing. When you've got, they kind of had Joey Farrell actually looking like the less confident of the two, and he's one of those. He was part of that Riverhound side last year who was the best defense in the league. So, all that being said, I think Dhillon's confidence and his ability to just put in a shift like that where he is battling center backs for 90 minutes. That was encouraging. And I think he is a little bit more fit for purpose in that, like, we asked a lot of forwards to try to do that last year who aren't designed to play that way. Like I would say even Lucho, like even Lucho is not really like that type of striker. And so I think Dhillon is like a little more built for that. If that's what we're going to ask him to do. The one thing that I would like to see a little bit more of, and maybe it was a positioning thing, maybe it was a quality thing. When you've got a guy that is that good in the air, I would love to have seen maybe a few more crosses into the box, like for him to attack in open play versus, obviously set pieces, guys like him and Bolu and like some of the big boys are going to be in there. But
I have to say that the set pieces were good.
Yes.
To be fair. Lucas Stauffer and Tumi Moshibane.
Yeah.
Very good delivery on both of them for the most part. So corners looked really good. We were giving Walters fits. He had to come out and claim a couple times. So maybe that'll be an avenue for scoring goals. But yeah.
Yeah. Moshibane is actually quite unlucky, I think, right at the end of the first half because he plays in an absolute pearl of a free kick that gets turned behind for a corner and then delivers the subsequent corner, which Alfaro heads onto the bar. So like he was a whisker away from 2 assists on back-to-back set pieces there. But yeah, so overall, like I think again, reasons for optimism, but getting to see more of that link up in attack is just going to be something that we'll want to see. And I think we'll get a good opportunity to get more practice at it next time out against Monterey Bay. But moving to stuff that made us optimistic from this last game, we mentioned Lucas Stauffer. He plays in this team as a left back, right-footed, obviously. So he was sort of inverting, almost playing as a midfielder in like a wide midfielder in many ways. But talk a little bit about Stauffer's performance and what impressed you, because I think it was a pretty resounding response from the fans as well to Stauffer's first outing in blue.
Yeah, I mean, just look at the numbers. It was absolutely incredible. 2 out of 2 successful dribbles, 7 out of 8 accurate long balls, won all 3 of his tackles. So he was doing it all in defense and in attack. 8 out of 9 ground duels won. Drew a lot of fouls as well. Just with his sheer pace, people couldn't really deal with him when he would bomb on. But yeah, Stauffer was very, very active. Clearly, someone who has been brought in specifically for this like wing back system, because he can do it really well. And you said he's right-footed, but honestly, there were times where I couldn't tell what his best foot was because he was good with both.
Yeah.
Obviously, he'd drive the ball forward with the right foot, but I mean, he had a couple of good plays with the left. So, and then he gets switched to the right side later on in the game. So, he could do either of those jobs if Nick Hines is going to come in and play on the left. So, yeah, really good debut, I think, for Lucas Stauffer. Again, one of the players that we've signed who's got experience in this league. He's fantastic with the media, by the way. Great guy to talk to. Very insightful, and clearly already is enjoying playing in front of the fans at the swap. So I don't know if you saw my thread, but he was asked, what's the atmosphere like compared to when he played in Germany, which, as we know, Germany is like world renowned for their fans.
Yeah.
And he said that he couldn't hear 5 yards in front of him. So that means that he's playing in a pretty good atmosphere. So he'll endear himself to the fans saying things like that for sure. But yeah, as far as on the pitch, I thought he was really good. And yes, I think there just needs to be more chemistry to build between him and his teammates, and then some of those passes and crosses that he was trying will hopefully come off and actually result in goals, but time will tell.
Yeah, 5 chances created on the night, which is by far the most of a Locomotive player, and I think the most of any player on either side. Caught the eye initially with the energy, with the dribbling, with the carrying the ball forward. But it was a pass that he plays to Justin Dhillon, maybe like 15-ish minutes into the game, that really like eye-popping in terms of he's in space on the left side of midfield. He looks up and he plays this, a through pass on the ground that splits, takes Hartford's entire team out of the game basically, and bypasses midfield, bypasses their defense, lets Dhillon run onto it. And that was really eye-catching in terms of just the vision required, because it's not a pass you typically see in like a wing back make. That's just, you know, that is like a number 10, you know, the like more traditional playmakers, I guess, but he is, you know, based on the numbers, you can see that he is going to be a playmaker in this team from that wingback position. So it'll be interesting to see how we can exploit that further. But looks like we've got quite the player on our hands. And another player that caught the eye, although, you know, we discussed, like, are we going to see Bolu Akinyode in defensive midfield or in central defense? There had been rumors that he would be in you know, deployed as a center back, maybe ever since he signed. It seemed like, you know, we may not have agreed necessarily with the decision for him to play at center back, but I mean, on the evidence, like, what a game that Bolu Akinyode had marshaling that back line.
Incredible. Yeah. I mean, he is a veteran in this league. He looks like he's been at the club for ages now. I mean, he was really, really good. What struck me the most was just how dominant he was in the air. I mean, every kind of threatening ball, pretty much every time he headed it clear. And, you know, he was with such a young player on the right side of him in Brandon Craig. I think it was really important that Bolu had a good game just to kind of solidify us back there. But yeah, his aerial prowess was really, really impressive. And just some of the tackles he made, some of the interventions he made were very timely and actually was very good on the ball too. 89% passing accuracy. That's what you want to see out of that central, you know, that middle center back, if you will. Now, do I think maybe we're not seeing the full complement of his skills because he's being put in the back line? Perhaps. I do still think he's like one of the best destroyers in the league. But at the same time, like I said at the top of the show, while I predicted that Dhillon would start because I wanted to see Bolu in midfield, it made sense that he went with the experience with the 29-year-old in midfield, so that we could kind of offset the years difference with Brandon Craig on the other side of him. So, but yeah, Bolu Akinyode, really, really good. Fatmob says he caused the penalty. I don't know it's true, but yeah, I thought he was excellent. And if he stays fit and, you know, keeps building on this form, he'll be in with a shout of like player of the season at the end of the day, I think. But, yeah.
Yeah. And to their credit, I think Alfaro and Brandon Craig were solid as well. Alfaro maybe a little more active, because of Stauffer getting down so far downfield. He obviously was asked to cover a lot of space, whereas Miles and Brandon Craig were maybe staying a little bit closer to each other. I do think there's probably a question mark in there about like Brandon Craig and Miles Lyons being on the same flank in terms of just like there was maybe a little bit of naivety there, and they were getting in down that side like in the first half. It felt relatively frequently. So I do think that there's probably still work to be done. Bolu was essentially deployed as a sweeper, like old school, like you know, like Beckenbauer style or whatever, like
right.
And where it was like he's meant to clean up like everything in front of the keeper, and he was like sideline to sideline, or you know, like
pretty much the width of the area.
Yeah. Like either side, and he was helping both Craig and Alfaro in terms of the coverage. So I do think, I mean, yeah, very good night for Akinyode, all things considered. I think, like you said, we'll continue to see if the midfield balance works itself out, then we won't have the questions anymore about Akinyode in central defense, but we'll definitely want to see some more there. The couple of other question marks in the first half, Amando Moreno like runs onto a pass in the area. The game was 1-0 at this point, and Moreno sort of takes like a loose touch, and Moshe Bane runs onto it in support. Brought down in the area. It looked like it may have been a pen. There were some immediate sort of appeals from Moreno and Moshabane, but nothing doing from the referee.
Yeah, this was a weird one because Moshabane and Moreno were like running into each other.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they caused it themselves or if it really was like a late intervention by the opponent. I couldn't tell you, to be honest. It was on the far side of where I was sitting in the press box, so I couldn't really see clearly what happened there. But it wouldn't be the first time that a call did not go our way. So, and I think that theme continued with probably a good goal that we scored. But yeah, I don't know. Do you think it was a pen?
It was very borderline. I think it's one of those where I was like, I wasn't sold on the angle that there was enough contact to warrant it. I think the tough part is that the most telling angle would have been the reverse, which just isn't available.
Right.
So
I think yeah, right.
If we could have seen from the other touchline or the end line, we probably would have gotten a good view of the contact. But unfortunately, I don't think either of those replays were forthcoming. So yeah, one of those where it's like, it looked sort of, my immediate reaction was like, oop, could be given. And then, yeah, when it wasn't forthcoming, it was kind of tough on the replay to actually see, like where the contact was, and if it was sufficient to bring him down. We did talk about, you mentioned, that there was a shout, second half, Amando Moreno, bends his run, to try to stay on side. Ball gets played into his path. He gets in behind Hartford's defender, squares the ball for Dhillon, and Dhillon hammers home from close range, only for the assistance flag to be raised. Obviously, the press box at the Swap is probably the worst vantage point in the stadium to try to judge an offside decision, but having seen it back, or having seen the footage, like, did you think that Locomotive may have gotten done there?
Yeah, so like you said, it's not as easy to see from the press box because we don't have that like lateral view of the run being made, even though the play is close to us from that eighth notch side. But I rewatched the game on TV, and to me, it looked completely fine. Yeah. I don't know what the linesman saw, obviously, but it didn't look. Let me put it this way: it didn't look obviously offside to where it's like anyone can make that call.
Sure.
I think it was. There was enough doubt there that it's like probably that goal should stand. Brian Clairhout thought that the goal should stand. He thought it was a bad call. He looked at the video right after the game and was effusive in that yeah, the refereeing affected the game. But yeah, I think the vibe is completely different if that goal stands, and I think we'd be able to stomach a draw. But again, we also had, maybe this would have been more appropriate for our pessimism section, but I mean, we also had a couple of gilt edge chances, particularly for Ricardo Zacarias, that him coming onto the pitch being fresh and not taking those is just, you gotta score those.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and
probably should have had a goal. Probably should have had 3 goals.
Yeah. No, you mentioned, yeah, for those couple of big chances. I think the unfortunate thing for Zaka is that it's an increasingly crowded forward line, that his chances are going to come, fewer and further between this year. And he is likely going to be deployed as more of that, like, super sub, fresh legs, which, I mean, physically he absolutely can give teams fits, especially with tired legs, and he's coming on fresh, and he gets into good areas, and it's just about, he has to be lethal, because when those chances come, Brian has to be able to rely on him to convert them. And that's like, when he looks down the bench the next time, it's like, how many of those before the doubt just creeps in of like, can I rely, on Zacha. And I think, unfortunately, finishing has just been like his Achilles heel. He was started last season, like finishing, I would say, like maybe the tougher chances. Like he was being very instinctive in his finishing and was kind of just putting away everything. Like if he was hitting it first time, a lot of times we were backing him to score. And for whatever reason, tonight he just kind of had his angles wrong. Like didn't have maybe his body position right in the couple of chances, and couldn't put it away. And it's almost like, when they talk about a big chance early in a game, they say like, oh, did the big chance come too early? And it's like, did the big chances come too early in his sub appearance? Like where he he just wasn't like prepared for that to fall to him. And I think, unfortunately, in both cases, he probably should be doing better. And I know he'll obviously, rue the fact that he missed those. And I'm sure he's probably been assigning himself, more blame than is necessary in that, really just the expectation from now, I guess, would be that he'll need to be able to be relied on. But yeah, not the only one, left with maybe a poor decision or something like that. But unfortunately, Zacha has the two like big kind of gilt-edged chances, as you said, like around his neck in this one.
Yeah, and I think to get back onto what was positive, I think the second half was largely good.
Oh, for sure.
It was largely positive. I think we looked a bit more comfortable on the ball. To be fair, Hartford Athletic, for some reason, just said they were going to defend their 1-0 lead, and hey, that's their prerogative. But I think for the most part, the second half showed kind of this team's potential. And while we acknowledge that Zacarias missed those chances, we also kind of have to acknowledge that we're creating such good chances that late into the game, which I think is a good thing. So
absolutely.
So yeah, Amando Moreno was off at that point, and maybe some questions of whether that was the right decision or not. But I think it'll all even out eventually.
Yeah, and you do have to take into account, obviously, as we kind of transition to talking about the next game. Obviously, with Moreno, probably a load management consideration, given that I'm sure he'll play apart from the start against Monterey Bay and then probably again against Louisville. So there is a consideration there right out of the gate. But well, I'll just share, I guess, from Oscar Galileo at One Star Galileo on Twitter, just as a way of closing the door on the Hartford game. He just said, I really like Stauffer and Bolu a lot. Dhillon did score, even though it did not, quote unquote, count. I'm interested to see the other forwards link up with Moreno and Dhillon. Year 6 seems promising. Time will tell. So that seemed to be sort of the overarching sentiment out of Locomotive fans is, obviously disappointed to lose, but not an overreaction in the sense that like they are recognizing that there were some real positives to take away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a 1-0 loss from a penalty. I mean, that just goes to show you that like we didn't really take our chances. It's not that Hartford Athletic put like a massive amount of hurt on us.
Yeah.
It's just that we couldn't respond. So, yeah, I think for the most part, like there's still a lot to look forward to. And especially as more guys get healthy too. I mean, we're missing big players like Petrovic. We talked about the quality that Joaquin Rivas has and what he can bring. So, as Brian's choices on the bench get better, I think we'll get better too.
Yeah. Worth noting, John Morrissey at USL Tactics did say, based on the stats available, that Locomotive recorded the highest expected goals of any team in USL on the opening weekend and no goals. So
Locomotive heritage, am I right? I mean, that's us. Like, it's not a problem of creating. It's a problem of sticking him in.
Yep. And hopefully that will change. Well, as we transition to talk about Monterey Bay, so Wednesday night, back at the SWAP, unique in that Locomotive obviously had the opening game under their belt. Monterey Bay did not play in the USL kickoff weekend, brought to you by Terminex. That's real. So Monterey Bay did not play an opening game yet. So this is their season opener. Unique in that way. Monterey Bay also unique in that they really are very similar, like for all of the turnover across USL in both managers and players. And like, it feels like a lot of teams have undergone some pretty significant changes. And in general, it feels like the league has taken a pretty significant step forward kind of in player quality, or at least like competition maybe, where the teams have sort of leveled out and there are less easy touches. Monterey really did not do much in the offseason aside from kind of consolidate what they had and maybe add a couple of exciting attacking pieces, but it does feel like maybe not enough evolution from Monterey Bay. And is it too bold to say that Locomotive should be expecting to win on Wednesday?
I mean, it's been a mixed bag against Monterey Bay. I think in seven games against them, the results are split. 3 wins for us, 3 wins for them, and a draw. So hard to say. I mean, the last time out, we lost to them narrowly, 1-2. One of the strikers on the day was Okoli, who they lost.
Yeah.
They've also lost Christian Valesky. Actually, interestingly, Brian called that out in the press conference because when we were asked, what do you know about Monterey Bay, he said they lost Christian Valesky. So that's a big player, at least in the eyes of the opponents, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they did sign Tristan Traeger, who is a decent player out of, I think, Charleston. Is that right?
Yeah, he was on Charleston last year. Right.
And then Luther Archimed, who I don't know that he was necessarily a super big player at Detroit City, but
and Sac Republic, I think he was a super sub.
Right. Archimed is how you say it. Whoops.
Yep.
But yeah, so some decent incomings, but I think that doesn't make up for what they've lost. And maybe if Chase Boone can find some form again, because I think his 2022 season was very productive, but I don't know that last season was up to that level, if I recall correctly, then maybe Monterey Bay can climb up the table. But I mean, lights aside, they were the worst team in the Western Conference. And so we'll be hoping definitely to bounce back. And from what Lucas Stauffer was telling us at the press conference, the team is grateful to have this opportunity come so quickly after an opening night loss. So hopefully they'll be fired up for that.
Yeah, I think it is interesting. Like you said, I don't know that they've done enough in terms of the pieces that they've added. Traeger and Archimed, added to Chase Boone and Alex Dixon. Those were kind of the guys that were firing last year for Monterey Bay. I will say the most frustrating game of the 2023 Locomotive season was the 0-0 draw in Monterey. I don't know if you remember that. Locomotive logged over 4 XG in that game.
Yeah. We should have blown them away.
It should have been like 10-0. Like that was how it was. I mean, for those, listen, like, yes, 4 expected goals means you score 4, but typically in a game where you actually log 4 expected goals, like that's like it's a slaughter typically. Ended 0-0. Absolutely unbelievable that Locomotive didn't score. I think they hit the woodwork like 3 or 4 times. It was absolutely insane. So yeah, not exactly like, I guess, loving the prospect. I think it was Siaha in goal for Monterey Bay, if I remember correctly, and is
that's correct. Yeah,
he was absolutely on one. So yeah, we haven't necessarily enjoyed our time, but I think I think all things considered, especially given the fact that Locomotive, now it is a little bit of a double-edged sword in that obviously the fresher legs will be Monterey's, but having gotten that first game out of the way, you almost have to think that Locomotive being able to sharpen that edge a little bit in a game condition, get that first game out of the way, they almost certainly have to try to come out of the blocks against Monterey, who it will be trying to find that match, that match speed essentially.
Yeah, I think Monterey Bay will be coming here not to lose, right? So if we can break them down early, then all the better. I think that's been kind of an issue with us too, is like scoring early is not necessarily our strength, but it's gonna need to become one if we want to take more advantage of these homestands. Because we struggled a lot at home. But this is a really good opportunity to get on the board. Obviously, they have what we talked about in the signings where we think maybe it wasn't enough. What they did retain was Frank Yallop, who is very experienced, was, quite a decent player himself, but has also managed all over. And so he's still there. So they have that continuity there. That, he might be able to get more out of the players. And, rather than having just gotten so many players in like we did, maybe he's just trying to build on what he has and just augment things rather than overhaul it. But, yeah, I think it's a big opportunity. And I think these Wednesday games, they're hard to predict, but I'll be there and we'll see.
The one one of the interesting moves that Monterey Bay did make is Rafael Baca coming in from Cruz Azul. Very experienced central midfielder, and I think he actually spent time with Frank Yallop when he was at San Jose Earthquakes. In MLS.
In like the early 2000s.
Yeah. So he's definitely brought him in like as a locker room presence. But adding to that veteran presence maybe a little bit. They do typically play in a 4-2-3-1 based off of last year. I think we could expect to see that attacking, like, I guess, quartet of probably Traeger with Chase Boone, maybe just off of him, Alex Dixon, and maybe Reba Yar. But it'll be interesting to see how they line up. I think all things considered, Locomotive do need to take this for the opportunity that it is, because I think many people expect this Monterey Bay side to be, especially with Light's evolution, this might be considered like the weakest team in the West. So I do think that points at home are on order. So Mikka, what do you think? Do you think Locomotive get the job done? And any thoughts on who grabs the first goal for Locomotive this season?
Well, I was wrong with my last prediction,
right.
Which was silly because I should have just gone with the odds that we never win on opening night.
Yeah, we were both foolish in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, but gotta be optimistic. You gotta. Yeah, I think we can win this game. I think maybe I'll go again 1-0. And I do like what Dhillon is doing. I do think he's getting into good positions. I think he's finding the box enough. I think he just needs to be a little bit more instinctive, and like he was on the goal that was ruled out, and then he'll score. So I'll give the first goal of our season to Dhillon against Monterey Bay, hopefully.
Yeah. No, I think Dhillon is a good shout. I'll just throw 2-0 out there to differentiate, but I'm actually going to go based on the fact that he was getting on the end of set pieces last time out. I might go Alfaro.
Okay.
Header from a set piece. He came very, very close at the end of the first half last time out. And and I think he got on the end of another one. So I think I may go. He just looks very natural in attacking those set pieces when he gets a chance to go forward. So I'll go with the set piece goal. And maybe it's because maybe it's still scar tissue from Saturday and Liverpool conceding to John Stones. But that's that's a whole other can of worms. So a Wednesday night kickoff in the Swap. Obviously, you said you'd be there, so excited to see how it goes down. Well, as we kind of wind things up, you asked last time if I was planning a trip out to El Paso for this season, and I'm now happy to say that it is planned.
Hey, the prodigal son returns.
So when Oakland Roots come to town, what did I say? April 13th?
April 13th. That's Saturday they come to town. Yeah.
Yeah. So I will also be coming to town. So I'll be in town. So anyone who I know out there, I'll get into town like Thursday, I think, and then I'll just make the rounds, just live my best life for a few days.
Love it.
Hit the old haunts.
Absolutely, got to buy you a beer, man.
Yeah,
I'm so excited.
Looking forward to it.
Is Erica coming?
No, I think it's gonna just be me. I think it's gonna be solo mainly because of child care considerations.
Sure. Got it.
But yeah, I think I'm gonna be flying solo.
Okay.
So
cool, and that's really not that far away at all. It's
a month.
5 matches.
It is 5 matches, but just the 1 month. Not your typical month, but no, excited for that, and we'll talk about maybe some more stuff we'll be putting together for that. But
absolutely.
But yeah, so
nice.
Coming back home. Aside from that, excited for another one. We've obviously, just like last season, I think it was almost a similar where we ended up in Louisville, like at the end of this little homestand. So similar vibes this time around. We'll probably, I don't know if we'll be able to do another episode before the Louisville game, but probably wrap up this one and Louisville, depending on how it goes.
And that Louisville game is a 1:00 kickoff. Like, that is coming off of Wednesday night. That's tough.
That's horrific. Yeah.
That is really tough.
Yeah.
So
it's absolutely brutal. So, hopefully you guys enjoyed the show. If you did, give us a like, a follow, a subscription on your favorite podcast platform. And we will talk to you guys at some point, hopefully after a couple of wins here. But until that time, stay local.